Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're gonna deep dive in Boba Yellow. We've talked a lot about Boba Yellow since the release of Shadow of the Galaxy. It's the obvious deck to build. It was one of the best deck in Spark of Rebellion meta, and it is a deck that has gotten a lot of new tools and new things, almost to the point where it becomes very difficult to figure out what there is that we need to play, what there is that is not as good, and it actually took us quite a bit of time, at least it took me quite a bit of time to really figure out what was the perfect mix of cards to get the best out of this deck. And something that is interesting to note when we compare Boba Yellow to Sabine Green is that Sabine Green got a lot of very few very powerful tools that really straight up made the deck a lot stronger and fixes at the meantime some of the weakness that the deck had. Boba Yellow is a bit different. The new tools that we had are not making the deck necessarily like far stronger. I mean, it does allows us to remove some of the fillers that we used to put in the deck in order to fill the gap, because playing a double yellow deck in set 1 was fairly difficult because you would have to put a lot of fillers. So we were able to replace those fillers by most powerful cards. But more importantly, we were able to get card that would straight up fix some of the weakness of the deck. So I would say that the power up is not as impressive as the one of Sabine Green, but it is still very much there. And for that reason, Boba Yellow is very much going to be one of the boogeymen of the meta, and one of the strongest deck that you're gonna have to consider whenever you are preparing for a tournament. So obviously there's a lot of different options and new interesting things that we got from this new set for this deck in particular. So we're gonna go over the reason why I went for the different cards that I've chosen in this deck. So just an overview of the deck. It is obviously the good old tempo deck. So the idea of the tempo deck is to put some very efficient threat, put the pressure on the opponent, and then use removal that will temporarily help you get a tempo advantage and control the opponent. So it is an aggro control deck, but it is more aggro than it is control. And usually the control tool that we're going to utilize are cards that are only going to basically help us to temporarily to tempo out the game temporarily. So card like bounce spells, exhaust effect, that kind of thing. So Boba Yellow is obviously the best deck in that category, and in my opinion, pretty much the only competitive deck in that category. And it is obviously better than ever because of the new set. So I'm not gonna go over all the classic card that we know and love from this deck. I mean, you probably know what Boba Fett. It is the best leader in the game. It still is, even after Shadow of the Galaxy. It still very much remains the best leader in the game. Just insane stats, very strong leader ability. If you want more details on the leader, you can check out my previous videos on Boba Yellow from Spark of Rebellion. So we're gonna go and focus more on what are the changes and how does this deck looks like with the new set. So we're gonna go over from the cheapest cards to the most expensive, and we're gonna start, of course, by also recontextualize as well the old card that we play. So first of all, we're gonna have Greedo. So Greedo still remains one of the best one drop in the game, and the main objective of Greedo is to either put pressure on the opponent early on in the game, or trade with the opponent 3 health unit. There's more than ever 3 health units that comes into play early on in the game, and Greedo helps us trade with this. We play quite a few non-events in the deck, meaning we can trigger his ability relatively often, even though we're not usually planning on that. It's just a bonus if that happens. One of the important thing about Greedo is that it does cost 1, which matters in a deck like Boba Fett, because we were often going to be, for example, using a cunning to bounce something, ready one of our resources, and with that leftover resources, we need to have something proactive to play for 1 resource, and Greedo is going to be one of the best things we can play on that front. Crafty Smuggler, of course, also still made it to the list. It's a threat that is difficult to get rid of, and it is something that is important for this deck, is to have 2 sticky threats that we can then boost with Surprise Strike. We now also play DL44 Blasters, obviously Cunning. And in order to play those boost spells, we need to have units on the board. So we need to have units that maybe are a little bit less aggressive, but are more chances of remaining on the board, and Crafty Smugglers is one of them. Counter Spacer is another sticky thread. The fact that it's a space unit makes it a little bit more harder to interact with. And you also have 3 health. It's not good against everything, but we still need some unit that we can play in space. We are playing an aggro deck at the end of the day, so we need these options to be able to arena dodge, and obviously sometimes, even though it's not necessarily always going to be the case, the ability also sometimes can be very relevant. So Counter Spacer we still play as a 2 of, just because there's simply nothing better to play in space as a 2-drop. A lot of people have been playing playing Mercenary Gunship. I think Mercenary Gunship is not as good in an aggro deck, and I'll explain a little bit more later why I think that's the case. But basically, it's a sticky threat in space that allows us to get some presence on the space arena when the opponent has managed to lock down the ground arena dodge the opponent, which is still very much an important thing whenever you're playing a relatively aggro deck. And then once again, on the 2-drop department, not much has changed, and I think it's going to remain a weakness of the deck. Moving forward is simply we haven't really found any new 2-drop that really brings the deck to the next level. So therefore the turn 1 play is still going to remain a relatively weak point in BOBA Yellow game plan. So Viper Prop Droid is a good card because it puts pressure on the opponent with the 3 attack. Once again, it's basically performed the same job as a Greedo, except that it's obviously more expensive, but still can be played on turn 1, and be able to look at your opponent's hand still remains a very important information that you can utilize to your advantage. So going now into the 3-drops, our turn 2 play, obviously Boba Disintegrator has become a little bit weaker with the rule changes. So now whenever a leader attacks, it counts as having entered the play this round, which means that you cannot just simply attack it with Boba Fett and deal 6 damage to it. So a little bit of a nerf compared to how he played in Spark of Rebellion, but still remain one of the best 3-5-4-3 in the game, even though there are a lot more competition on that department. In my opinion, it is better than Toro because of the fact that he's called Boba Fett, which means that you can equip him with Boba Fett armor, and that potentiality makes the card a very big threat. And I think the on-attack ability still remains more relevant than Toro's ability most of the time, especially since we're not specifically playing a bounty hunter focus deck. So I think Boba Fett remains not by a wide margin. So if you want to have to go for a more budget option, playing Toro instead of Boba Fett is completely acceptable. It's not a huge difference, but definitely I feel Boba Fett still remains a little bit better as far as the 3-5-4-3 goes, and mostly because it can equip Boba Fett's armor. So obviously this is going to be, once I was talking about like a turn 2 play, it's going to put pressure on the opponent, and because he has 5 health, it's going to be once again a relatively sticky threat, which is, as I said, very important in Boba Yellow. Moving on, we have DJ. DJ is, in my opinion, the second 3-5 that you're going to be playing in Boba Fett's moving forward. And the reason for this is because his smuggle ability is pretty relevant in weak matchups. So currently, I think Boba Yellow is going to be weak typically against control deck, whether they are soft control decks like Kira or Krennic, or hard control deck like Iden or Boba Blue, or Iden Blue or Iden Yellow, or all those decks thrown. And DJ basically can be played and smuggled and steal your opponent resources right before the opponent has access to a super laser blast, and this is extremely relevant. So being able to prevent your opponent from getting into their super expensive unit, prevent them from getting to their Snoke, to their super laser blast, to their Krayt Dragon, all those things is super relevant against hard control decks. So I would say that DJ, in my opinion, is once again, you're not going to use a smuggle in every matchup, but it's a card that is, in my opinion, better in the weaker matchups. So obviously it's a 3-5-4-3 most of the time, but then the ability to smuggle is so relevant against control that it makes a card that is very much, in my opinion, a better choice over Toro, which Toro ability might be a little bit more used a bit more often. but when DJ's ability is used, it's incredibly important, and that's what makes me want to play DJ in this deck over Toro. And then we still have, of course, 7th Fit Defender, another great example of a sticky unit that is hard to get rid of, that puts pressure, and allows us to have some threat in space alongside of the ground. So it's very, very important card as well. Then we got 4LOM, which is obviously the new 4 drops that most Boba decks are going to be playing moving forward. I think this card is very strong against aggro because it comes to play, kills like a small unit and leave a threat on the board, and your opponent kind of has to deal with it because if it doesn't, he's take the risk of having the Zucus +1/+1 ambush that we also play. So it's also a bounty hunter, so you can play Relentless Pursuit. So yeah, there's a lot of 3/5 for 3 in the current meta, which in my opinion kind of limits how much the potential of the card. And but it still remains a card that is going to do its job most of the time, can get rid of like a blocker and put a threat on the board. It basically performed the same job as ATRT in my previous version of the deck, but it does the job of course a lot better. So a great addition for the set, and reinforce the weakest point of Boba, which was the 4 drops. Really, the deck didn't have anything on the 4 curve. Now we have something pretty good to play, which is very nice. Cantina Bouncer still remains, in my opinion, the best 5-drop for the deck. The ability to bounce a unit, a non-leader unit, and put a threat at the same time is simply just a tempo deck Wet's Dream. It's exactly what we're looking for, and I think it still remains very relevant in the current meta. I think especially against decks like against Aggro or against Aggro Sabine or against Tarkin vehicle, the bounce is extremely relevant. It's just a great card, and it also combines very well with a new adventure, which is also another great asset. Syndicate Lackeys, as a 2 of, is obviously replacing Bosk. Bosk, as good as I like Bosk, I think Syndicate Lackeys is just way better positioned in the meta. There's just simply so many 3/5s in the meta. Obviously we got DJ, Toro, Boba Fett, Sabine herself, and Cassian. There's just so many 3/5s that Syndicate Lackey is going to be able to come into play, kill them, and stay on the board. He has more attack, which means put more pressure on the opponent if it's not dealt with. It is, in my opinion, so much better than Bosk at the moment. This is just simply so much better targets for it. That makes it the card, I think, the weapon of choice for us as far as the 5 curve. 5 curves is particularly important for Boba because it's a flip turn. We get into Syndicate Lackeys, kill something, untap with Boba, summon Boba, attack with Boba, untap 2, and then we can play a 3-drop. And then we can play 5 drops, flip Boba, and play a 3-drop on the same turn, and go to town. And that's just obviously still a very powerful thing. In order to maximize our chance to doing this, we're playing the 2 Syndicate Lackeys and the 3 Cantina Bouncers. Still in the 5-drop, we got, of course, Zucus. Zucus is more of a massive, big, proactive threat we can play on 5. It's good to have reactive threats like Cantina Bouncer and Syndicate Lackeys, but sometimes we need something. There's nothing to react to, and we just want to play something proactive, and obviously playing just a 6/6 Saboteur for 5 is just very powerful. So we played 2 copies of Zucus. No, why only 2 copies? Because otherwise you just be too many 5-drops. We already played Syndicate Lackeys, Cantina Bouncers, and Zucus, so it's just a bit too crowded in the 5-drops category. So that's why we only played 2 of them. And obviously, little bonus, it also gives +1/+1 and Saboteur to our 4 LOM. And of course, if we have 4 LOM, then it becomes a 7/7 ambush, which is just extremely relevant. In the 6-drop, obviously we play what remains the best card in the deck, or second best card in the deck. It's obviously Fett's Fire Spray, huge amount of pressure into space, and is going to be our finisher. The card is still it's still very powerful in the current meta. It has not hasn't become weaker or stronger. It just still remains just extremely solid. Okay. Actually, a card that did make Fire Spray better is a new Adventure. So a new Adventure is quite situational in this deck. A lot of people were kind of super excited about when the card came out. when the card came out, because of all the potentiality and all the strong combination that he had in his shell. And he does have a lot of them, but sometimes the card is just going to be a little bit too situational. So what are the main way that we're going to use a new adventure? So one of the way we use a new adventure is to obviously re-trigger a when played effect. So currently I think that one of the strongest when played effect you can trigger back is basically the one of Cantina Bouncer. You get to bounce a unit for 2, which is a fairly good rate. It's basically better than the Waylay. You can re-trigger, so that's more in the sideboard. We can re-trigger like a body Rook, which is very relevant, or re-trigger a Bazine, which is, those are like super relevant. You can obviously heal and at the same time re-trigger the ambush out of a Syndicate Lackeys or 4 LOM. This is also very, very strong and in the right moment, but those are like kind of situational. The main use of this card, in my opinion, the most powerful way to use a new adventure in this deck is to reset a Fire Spray. So the idea is you play Fire Spray, you attack with Fire Spray, you deal 5. The turn after, you attack a Fire Spray, you deal 5. You run new adventures, you blink Fire Spray, and you can attack again. And this is, in my opinion, one of the number one reason to play new adventure. This is just incredible. They're just decks that cannot one-shot a Fire Spray, so they will try to deal half the damage on a Fire Spray. And then you just can play a new adventure. Not only do you heal the Fire Spray, and then you get it back into play ready. So this card has made a Fire Spray a lot better, and for that reason alone deserves some spots into the deck, because this will allow you to win games that normally you shouldn't be able to win. And for that reason alone, this card is incredible. Of course, this card can be used in other ways. It can be used to blink enemy units, to make their upgrades fall off. So it's another upgrade removal. Doesn't work on leaders, but work on a lot of things. You can just simply exhaust the unit at the same time. So it's kind of think about this as an exhaust effect that makes the opponent upgrades fall off. So it's better than Bamboozle, actually, just a better version of Bamboozle almost. Bamboozle has the advantage of hitting leaders, so it is kind of you can use it as a Bamboozle. You can also use it on your own unit in order to remove bounties. Very relevant against Bosk, notably. So you reset your unit, use the bounty. One of the best thing I like to do is you get so a unit with shield. Your opponent plays a bounty, remove the shield with Bosk. Then play new adventure, you make the bounty fall off, and you reset the shield at the same time. Just very powerful. So it's a good card, but it remains situational. That's why we only play 2. No Good To Me Dead still remains in the deck. I think this card is excellent in a tempo deck. The ability to just block a unit for 2 whole turn is just massive in a deck that is going to try to kill you very quickly. It's a 2 of. It's not good against everything, but when it's good, it's amazing, so we play 2. Surprise Strike, of course, is the finisher of the deck. Remains a very, very important card, especially in this deck. It's obviously a 3 of. And another great addition, Relentless Pursuit, which is basically a way for us to get rid of a unit and at the same time give a shield to a Bounty Hunter. So currently on the Bounty Hunters we play 4 LOM, Boba Fett Disintegrator, and Boba Fett's our leader. And usually we're going to be wanting to play this on our leader to get rid of a 5-drop and put a shield on a unit. Once the unit has put a shield, this means the opponent is gonna require a lot of effort and time for the opponent to get back that unit. Yeah, obviously we can play this card even on stuff that is not Bounty Hunter. You can still get rid of like a massive unit if you play this on your Fire Spray, and the tempo advantage is just huge. It's one of the strongest cards you can play on a flip turn with Boba, because not only so you get rid of a unit, that you get to untap resource and put a shield on your Boba, get rid of a threat, and then attack. It's very, very powerful. It is quite situational, that's why we only play 2, but in a situation in which it's good, it's really, really amazing. 1 copy of Waylay, just to answer certain situations that cannot be answered otherwise. Having a little bit of diversity of different cards. When there are cards that are not just strictly better than others, I like to go for a little split. So here I went for a 2 Relentless Pursuit Waylay split. There are situations, of course, where Waylay is better than Relentless Pursuit, and that's why it's still in the deck. Obviously, the best card in the deck still remains the best card in the deck is obviously Cunning. Yeah, not much to say about this card. It is, if you want more details on how to use this card effectively, you can check out my the previous video that I made about Boba Yellow. This card in the new meta still remains an absolute menace. It's absolutely huge tempo swing, huge amount of damage that you can deal with your opponent with this card, as well as controlling. It's just the ultimate tempo card and the main reason to play the deck. New addition to the deck is 2 copies of Hotshot D44 Blaster. This card is great in this deck because it's one of the inconvenience of the playing Cunning in general and playing Yellow in general is just that we are gonna be spending a lot of cards that do cards disadvantage, and at some point we can kind of run out of gas. And Hotshot D44 we can smuggle it early on in the game, and then using later on to get an initial bonus damage. We can use that to kill a big threat or to push more damage. It only works on non-vehicle unit, but the majority of our deck is on the ground. So basically, I think the only 3 vehicles we play is going to be Carlos Spacer, 7th Speed Defender, and Fire Spray. So really, like, the card is very easy to use, and it can be used in a number of different ways. And once again, the bonus is permanent. Once you've played that, you get an immediate impact because you get a +2 attack and attack right away. And then the opponent, if he doesn't deal with a threat, you're going to keep that +2 attack bonus for the rest of the game. So that's just very, very strong. And the fact that you can do this from your resource point, there is literally no reason to play this card for is regular cost, because you're going to be spending 3. So always smuggle that card. Never play it for its normal cost. There's just literally no reason to ever play this card for its normally. Just always smuggle this card. But yeah, a great card when it is smuggled for sure. So we play 2 of those cards, and obviously we play also 2 copies of Boba Fett's armor. So the main argument against Boba Fett's armor is that it's not very useful in matchup that are it's not great against Sabine, because Sabine you don't really care about making your Boba Fett invincible most of the time. And even if you do happen to play Boba Fett's armor on your leader, unfortunately, because Poe can actually get rid of upgrades, Poe can still one-shot your Boba Fett. So it's not even like an ultimate protection. So it's not great against Sabine Green, and it's not great against hard control, because hard control simply don't care too much about the +2/+2 bonus, and can simply just rivals fall your dude. So however, against pretty much everything else, this is going to be one of the best cards in your deck. So that's why we only play 2 of, because it's not good against everything, and it's not good against some of the most prevalent decks in what the meta is going to be, I feel like. However, against everything else, Boba Fett's armor is an absolute menace. It makes your Boba Fett's, your leader, pretty much invincible, because the 2 damage prevention from on each instance of damage, plus the +2/+2 stat, is absolutely incredibly difficult to get rid of. It's also quite good on just playing on the Disintegrator. If you don't expect your opponent to have answers to this, you can also just simply play on Disintegrator. You can also play it, of course, on any random unit, but obviously the main goal is to play it on your leader and make your leader invincible. Extremely powerful against notably the green-black red decks, like the Vaders and the Bosk ramp decks. Is gonna have very hard time to get rid of it. Absolutely game breaking versus Han Solo. Han Solo simply cannot deal with that. It's just so incredibly oppressive. So it's the kind of card that I personally hate. Kind of card that is very good against some decks, but not so good against others. But it is one of the biggest upgrade in the deck for some matchups. So this is obviously going to be a 2 of, with an additional copies in the sideboard for those specific matchups. Talking about sideboard, let's get into it. So first sideboard card is going to be Bazine Detal. The card is just a little bit too slow, and there's going to be some matchup where the card is useless against any aggro matchup. And for that reason, the card is kind of like a little bit, I would say, it needs to be played specifically against hard control, but against hard control, it's absolutely game breaking. So one of the big arguments for Bazine Detal to be such a big upgrade for the deck is that one of the weaknesses of Boba Yellow in the previous in Spark of Rebellion was those hard control decks. And I think with Bazine, this is changing a lot because we have a card that allows us to get rid of the key card of the opponent, notably the Super Laser Blast and stuff like this. And the fact that the card can be smuggled is absolutely disgusting. It's also a 1/3 that can absorb power of the dark side. It's just literally the ultimate anti-hard controlled card. It's such an amazing addition to the deck and really changes the matchup dramatically. So it isn't 3 ofs in the sideboard because it is one of the best cards against hard control and also one of the best, which is one of the worst matchup for historically for Boba Yellow. I'm not so sure that the hard control decks are going to have a good matchup versus Boba Yellow because of Bazine. So an additional copies of Boba Fett's armor for the grindy matchup for, as I said, all the decks that have all the Hans, the Bosks, the Vaders, all those decks is going to have hard time getting rid of the Boba Fett's armor. Boba Fett's armor is going to be a great addition, so we had a 3rd copy of the card after sideboard. In the same vein as Bazine, we also have Body Rook, so I decided to build the deck, to really the main deck, sort of like a core, as sort of really as an anti, as building against aggro. And this is the reason why Body Rook does not make it to the main deck, is because I think Body Rook is not very useful against aggro. But against, once again, grindy matchup against control, it's absolutely amazing, of course. Obviously, any decks in which you have a chance to basically miss and not find anything, Body Rook is not so great. And also, I feel like the 3/3 stat line is very poorly positioned in the current meta where there's just so many 3/5s. So that's why it's not making it to the main deck, because it's just so bad against aggro. But against control and against even against like mid-range control deck, like once again the Kira, the Krennics, the Palpatines, the Vaders, the Bosk, Body Rook is going to be an absolutely amazing card. So obviously it's making the presence as a 3 of in the sideboard. Another amazing tool against control, really. Boba Yellow got so many tools against control that it's really changing them, and it's such a great addition for the deck because, as I said, hard control used to be a pretty bad matchup for Boba Yellow, but with Lurking TIE Phantoms being added to the mix, I don't think the out control decks are going to be a problem at all. This card is amazing against out control because as soon as it's on the battlefield, you can just ignore any when defeat effect, notably Power of the Dark Side, and Power of the Dark Side and Avenger. You can just choose Lurking TIE Phantoms, nothing happens. It's going to be a card that's very difficult to get rid of for those hard control decks. You're going to have to bring special, like, kind of Sentinel units in space or to be able to get rid of it. And then it attacks for 4. It puts a lot of pressure. So it's a really great card in those matchups. And it's a 2 of. Why is it only a 2 of? Well, simply because it's only something we're going to be while Bazine and Body Rook can be cited in a variety of different matchups. Lurking TIE Phantom is a bit more specialized and is only really a tool versus blue-based hard control decks. I mean, it's good. It can be good in other matchups, but most likely it's going to be for those matchups that's going to be there. So that's why it's only a 2 of. 1 copy of Change of Heart for those kind of super big mid-range decks. Still a good card, a good finisher for the deck. And that's it. That's it for the sideboard. So as you can see, we have a so if I had to come back to the deck list, I gotta say that the main deck is mostly built to beat aggro, as you can see. We're really focusing on like the Temple tool, the No Good To Me Dead, the Waylay, the Relentless Pursuit to really get rid of a unit and put pressure. D44 Blaster is really excellent against aggro. It allows us your Boba Fett to, it allows your 3/5s to be able to deal 5/5 to kill Sabine, to race. It's just mostly focused on beating fair decks, beating aggro decks is going to be the main focus of the main deck. And then the sideboard is for the control matchup. So why do I decided to do it that way? It's just because I feel like the anti-aggro tool are a bit more versatile and work for a variety of different decks, and I also believe that aggro and notably Sabine is going to be one of the main deck that we're going to be fighting against in the meta, so we need to have weapons against that. And in the sideboard, we're mostly focusing on hard control and control in general. So why is are we siding almost exclusively against hard control? It's not only because it's a bad matchup, it's also because the tools that we have to deal with them are just extremely efficient. So for example, I could put in my sideboard some Gam Guard in order to improve my aggro matchup, and it would probably work, and it would actually improve my aggro matchup. But the thing is, by doing that, Gam Guard does not improve our aggro matchup by a lot. It only improves it by a few percentage. The improvement that it does is going to be marginal. While the improvement of the matchup against control, whenever you're playing a Bazine or a Body Rook or a Phantom, is far, far more impactful. So you have to think about, okay, what am I winning against? What is the most played deck? And try to counter those decks. But in the meantime, you also have to think, okay, well, I have those anti-aggro cards, I have those anti-control cards, but how good are those anti-control cards are doing their job? Well, how good are those anti-aggro cards are doing their job? And the anti-control cards are just so insane. They just improve the control matchup so dramatically that even though control at the moment represents a small percentage of the meta, it's still worth including because the impact is going to be so massive. And also do believe that control is going to see more and more play as we move on to the meta and as control like kind of figure out how to work things out. Now we're going to go over. No, before we do this, oh, no, it's not the right thing. Okay, yeah, let's do a little bit of mulligans to see how things play out. So this is an hand that we're going to be mulliganing because it doesn't have any turn 1 play. Okay, this hand is much better. We got a turn 1 Crafty Smuggler or Viper Prop Droid, depending on the matchup. If we think that opponent can easily kill the Viper Prop Droid, we might want to go Crafty Smuggler. We're probably gonna resource one of the 2 drops, the one that we're not playing, and probably the Waylay. And then we're gonna go turn 2 Boba Fett. We're gonna hope to draw something to play on turn 3, and then we got our turn 5 play, and obviously the Fire Spray that we try to never mulligan if possible. Okay, this hand is interesting. Yeah, but overall I think it's a mulligan. You can go, I guess it's not, yeah, you can go turn 1 Greedo, and then you can go turn 2 Greedo plus Viper Prop Droid if the first Greedo gets killed. It depends. If you think the Greedo is good in this matchup, we might resource probably the Greedo and the Zuckuss if we think the Boba Fett's armor is going to be good. It depends on the meta. It depends on how powerful. This hand, it really depends. This hand is, it's not a straight up mulligan or a keep. It really depends on what you're playing against. Okay, this hand is terrible. Doesn't have a turn 1 play. And this hand is much better. Turn 1 play Crafty Smuggler. Turn 2 either Defender or Boba Fett. We can resource the D44 Blaster. We've got a turn 4, turn 5. Excellent, excellent hand against almost everything. And last hand, yeah, turn 1 Viper Prop Droid, or turn 1 Crafty Smuggler, turn 2 Boba Fett. We'll probably resource one of the 2 true drops and a Cantina Bouncer. Keep the Surprise Strike if possible, because it's such a great card in the deck. So now we did a couple of mulligan. We're gonna go into basically some cards that are considerations for the deck and kind of give you my opinion on what I think about those cards. So first we got the Confiscate. Right now there's not really any upgrade that we really fear so much, and most of the card that so basically maybe I would say and most of the upgrades that we fear, we have answers to them. So for example, if your opponent plays like something along the lines of like a Darksaber on the Sabine, we can play Relentless Pursuit. We can also play No Good to Me Dead. I mean, it really depends on what we're playing against, I guess. But Confiscate is not a bad card, but I don't feel like we're needed in the matchup. So it's good against hard control because it removes all the forgot the name, all the like the Frozen Carbonites and the Entrench. But once again, we have answers to those. We can bounce our own unit to get rid of them, and we have just better things to do, better cards against hard control in general. So it's not a bad card. But I just feel like specifically in this deck, because we have access to Waylay, to have access to all those bounce effects, we can deal with upgrade pretty well. And we don't need, before, kind of in the previous iteration in Spark of Rebellion, we were playing Confiscate in the sideboard simply because we didn't have anything else better to play. But in my opinion, in this new set, we do have so much stuff to consider that it's hard to make space for Confiscate, even though it's not a bad card at all. I've seen some people playing Enticing Reward. I just think that it's a little bit too it's a little bit too inconsistent in this deck. We're not really actively trying to kill units in this deck. We're just trying to deal with a couple of units, and most of the case we're going to be dealing with them just with a No Good to Be Dead or Waylay. So we're not even going to be able to collect the bounty most of the time. So collecting the bounty is far from guaranteed. And it is not a deck that is really trying to get value. It's not really a deck that is trying to outvalue the opponent. It's really a tempo-based deck, so Enticing Reward just nothing to do in this deck. But I saw a couple of people playing it. That's why I had to talk about it. Okay, Maclunkey has been a strong consideration for me for a very long time. But as its name indicates, it is kind of a clunky card. It's a card that that's having to bounce your own unit is such a massive cost in this game. Unless you're able to bounce like a Greedo back into your hand, and then replay it right away for free because you get the untapped free resources with Boba, then having to basically bounce your own unit is just too big of a cost in a lot of situations. So there's basically two scenarios in which this card is very good, is if you're able to bounce, once again, a Greedo, or if you're able to bounce a Dr. Evazan, and Dr. Evazan lost his shield, and you're afraid that Dr. Evazan is going to die. So you just play Maclunkey to bring this Dr. Razan back into your hand. And then, of course, you need to have a good target for it. So it's a clunky card. It's a situation where it's amazing, but it is clunky. It's difficult to use, and it's not always great. And I think I would prefer to go for consistency. In my opinion, if you're playing Dr. Evazan, you should probably be playing Maclunkey, because Maclunkey does make Dr. Evazan a lot better, because it allows you to counterbalance the downside by simply just bouncing the card back into your hand later on in the game when you're afraid that it's likely to die. But if you're not playing Dr. Evazan, I feel there's just better things to do than playing Maclunkey. Shoot First is another strong consideration. It's a good card against aggro. But it was already kind of situational in set 1, and it's still very much the same in set 2, and once again there's just far more competition now, far more things that you have to consider. And you can't, and obviously there's only so many non-unit card that you want to have in your deck, so you really want to prioritize those slots for the most important cards. And I don't think Shoot First is one of them. This could be potentially a sideboard card against aggro, but as I said, I made the choice of building the main deck against aggro and having my sideboard against control. So you could theoretically build a Boba Yellow that is completely made to kill aggro, that would completely ignore the control matchup and just play some Shoot First and some Gam Guards in the sideboard. But that's not what I decided to do. I went for a balanced approach because I think that we're not yet in the meta where we are completely dominated by aggro yet. This might happen eventually, but we're not there yet. Swoop Down is another strong option. This card is pretty bad because we do not really play that many space units. However, it does serve a specific purpose, is the idea of attacking with a unit and give it saboteurs, just to allow you to bypass enemy Sentinel. Sentinel in space are extremely good at dealing with fire spray, and Swoop Down is a direct counter to this. So if we ever come into a meta where everybody's playing tons of every deck is playing kind of a lot of Sentinel in space, then Swoop Down could be an answer to this, but I don't think this is where we are right now. Cloud Rider is another interesting consideration. It is kind of a Greedo that can turn into a removal. With that being said, as I said, this deck is mostly an aggressive deck, so it doesn't really want to use his units as removal. Not only you want to use unit to put pressure on the opponent and let the opponent attack your units. So we rarely would want to use the ambush on this card. So at the end of the day, it just becomes a worse copy of Greedo, and I would rather just play something that has an extra health, as it is relevant in a number of matchups. Dr. Evazan has been part of my deck for a very long time, so I have an extensive experience playing with this card, and it is by far one of the hardest cards to evaluate in the entire set. it is a card that is in some game is going to be absolutely amazing, and in some games is going to be absolutely terrible. So my take on a Razan is like I think a Razan is a great card, but in order to make this card work, you need to be running McClunky. And here's the thing, I don't want to be running McClunky. I don't think McClunky is good enough of a card to be run, and therefore the fact that Dr. Razan forces me to run McClunky made me want to give up on him. So why is it McClunky is such important for Razan? Obviously because the idea is you play this as a 2-drop, you put tons of pressure on opponent, makes it very hard to deal with, and then when your opponent is trying to set up a moment where he can kill the Razan to get tons of value, you can McClunky back into your hand. And I think that's a very relevant. You can also reset the shield using a new adventure. It's not as definitive and it is not as strong. But yeah, most likely, yeah, I'll say Dr. Razan is, I think it is worth playing if you're playing McClunky. If you're not, then it becomes, in my opinion, a bit too easy for your opponent to use against you in the later stage of the game. So yeah, very hard card to evaluate, as I said. At the moment, I decided to go against it because I decided to not include McClunky in my deck. Fugitive Wuki, another card that is also would have been a strong consideration for the deck. Once again, I think one of the main problems with Fugitive Wuki is just the super bad interaction when you combine it with unit that comes into play ready, whether it is your leader, Boba Fett, or a Fire Spray. The fact that your opponent can just wait for the right moment to kill the Fugitive Wookiees and tap down your Fire Spray or tap down your Boba is just so incredibly bad. So the bounty is just a lot worse than I thought it was. So I'll definitely get ready to give this card another try eventually. But for now, I decided to go against it because I just thought that the extra health compared to a Viper Probe Droid was not worth the downside especially since Viper Probe Droid also has an upside of being able to look at your opponent's hand. So I thought just when I compared the two cards, I just thought that Viper Probe Droid has more value than Fugitive Wuki. Maybe we'll live in a meta where there's just so many ways to deal 2 damage to a unit that Fugitive Wuki will end up seeing play instead. But for now, I prefer to stick with the Viper Probe Droid. Jetpack is a card that I've seen some people play. I know that the Soup Racer crew really love that card. I honestly don't understand how this card, I think it's a fine card, but it's mostly like a control card because you give a shield to a unit. Most likely you want to use this to kind of kill an opponent unit. In my opinion, I prefer D44 Blasters. It costs 1 less to smuggle because this card is most likely going to be played with smuggle. But D44 Blasters allow you to attack with the unit right away, which I think is super important, and it costs 1 less. Jetpack, yes, the temporary shield is nice, but yet it does cost 1 more. Doesn't give you the immediate attack, which I think is a big deal. So overall, I have a preference for D44 Blasters over this card, even though it is undeniably a good card, but I prefer D44 Blasters. That's just simple as that. Mercenary Gunship is a card that was a strong consideration once again as trying to make the 2-drop, but once again the downside is a bit too big of a deal in a specific deck. So basically my opinion on Gunship is I love Gunship in control decks. If you're playing like a defensive deck, I love Gunship because you're going to use it, you're going to be trading, and you're going to be trading with the opponent's space units. And it's not gonna left alive very long. But in an aggro deck, you're not really trying to do this. In an aggro deck, like for example, like Boba, you are attacking the opponent base. So in that context, Gunship is meant to stay alive, and if you can simply just deal with it by taking control of it, it's going to be a big problem. And it's also a very bad combination with Cunning. So basically, I cannot Cunning a Berserker Gunship because as soon as I do that, my opponent is just going to take control of it. So it's very anti-synergistic with Cunning. It's hard to the downside is very significant because we're not trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible. We're trying to attack base. So I simply just have a very bad experience with Gunship. I would rather play the Cattle Spacer, which is harder to deal with. Might be dealing less damage, but it's harder to deal with. Has an entering battlefield effect, which can be very relevant. And as I said earlier, whenever you're playing Boba Yellow, you want to have a threat that are sticky. You want sticky threats. You don't want threats that are just super easy to deal with, like most of the gunship is. Frozen Carbonite is definitely a consideration in the deck, but the fact that it cannot affect leader is a big deal. And obviously, I would much rather play No Good to Be Dead, because in this particular deck, tapping a unit for 2 additional turns is almost the same as exhausting the unit for the entire game, because games are usually pretty short. So yeah, in a tempo deck, No Good to Be Dead is a far better card than Frozen Carbonite. Triple Dark Raid is has been something that a lot of people have been testing, notably the Soup Racer crew. Once again, they played a lot of Triple Dark Raid. The problem of this card in Boba Yellow is that in order to include this card into your deck, you need to be playing a bunch of vehicles, and it turns out that there's just not that many great vehicles in this color. So basically, you're gonna have obviously your Fire Spray, but then you're gonna have to add card like ATST, Xanadu Blood, all those kind of crappy vehicles that are not really that good. I mean, obviously you'll be playing the TIE Advance, but then if you're to play TIE Advance, you need to play like... So, it has... having to... I thought the card was pretty clunky, and having to play all those expensive vehicles in the deck was overall just a big asshole, and just playing a triple Dark Raid, and often you would just play it's also very inconsistent. Sometimes you would just find like something like a 7th Speed Defender or TIE Phantom with the triple Dark Raid, and just playing 3 for a 3-drop that you could play anyway, and you come into play ready, but you have to bounce it back into your hand. Such a big bummer. If you're running triple Dark Raid to just play a 3-drop, that just is such a waste. So the card was simply just too inconsistent. Great potential for the future, but for now I felt like the card is just too inconsistent. Obviously there's going to be a situation where it's going to be absolutely amazing. You can go triple Dark Raid into Fire Spray, then blink the Fire Spray with the a new adventure. That is absolutely insane, and so it's a card that can do insane stuff, but it is fairly inconsistent, and it is just against my playstyle. I prefer to play combos and cards that are more consistent, rather than cards that are like super eye rolly but obviously there's going to be vehicles version of Boba that are going to be roaming around, and we'll see how successful they are. Toro Calican has been a strong consideration for the deck. I just found the ability to be extremely situational, and that I do not use very often. And obviously there's tons of competition for 3/5 for 3 in this deck, for 3-drops in general, by the way. And I think both Boba's Integrators and DJs are both better cards. DJ, not because it triggers more often, but because it really helps in matchups that are difficult. And Boba Fett, mostly because Build is more relevant, and it's a Boba Fett, so you can put a Boba Fett's armor on it. With that being said, if you are on a budget and you want to make the deck more budget, replacing Boba Fett's by Toro is very acceptable. It really doesn't make that big of a difference in terms of power level, so you can do that without any problem. Gam Guard is also a card that I think has been a strong consideration, once again because the 4-drops in this deck are so weak, but also because it's very strong against aggro. I believe it's like a very good addition to an aggro deck. So Gam Guard, an additional for 4 LOM, like to get more consistent, like strong 4-drops, is definitely something that you can do to improve your aggro matchup. With that being said, as I said, the impact that it's going to have on the aggro matchup is going to be fairly marginal. While there's a card that you can include in your sideboard that can really dramatically change your control matchups, that I would rather be playing instead. But if aggro is really out of control and I really want to improve my matchup against aggro, I would definitely consider putting some Gam Guards in the sideboard. Tobias Becket is another 4-drop that has been considered for Boba Yellow. The Smoggle, even though it costs 7, can be relevant against hard control when you run out of gas. And it is a pretty decent stat, like really pretty good stats, and the ability is pretty relevant as well. Personally, I've decided to go against it. But if you're looking for more 4-drops for the deck, and you want a 4-drop that is very versatile, that can work against almost any deck, Becket is definitely a strong option to go for. Personally, between 4 LOM and Cunnings, I haven't really I felt like I don't need more 4-drop than this. I think that 8 4-drop is kind of enough for the deck. But Tobias is definitely a strong contribution. I wouldn't even be shocked if people play Tobias over 4 LOM, but I found 4 LOM to be far too valuable against aggro to give up on it. So decided to go without Tobias, but it's definitely a card to consider for Boba Yellow. Obviously, Bosk, when the meta comes around and 4-5 become a very powerful stat line, Bosk will definitely be played over Syndicate Lackeys, but in the current meta, and I suspect to remain so for the remainder of the set, Syndicate Lackeys will remain a better card because of all the 3-5s roaming around. Final Showdown is also a card that has been considered as a finisher, notably against aggro. I just find the card to be incredibly situational. So if I ever was going to run Final Showdown, it would be in the sideboard. And as I said, I decided to focus myself against control. If I really want a card that are really finishers, and I also do help against difficult matchups, I would rather play just more copies of Change of Heart, which is far less which has a similar role but is far less situational. And that's it. This is it for all my considerations for Boba Yellow. So currently, where does the deck stand? I think the deck is definitely going to be one of the tier 1 decks in the meta. I don't think it is as powerful as people were expecting it to be, mostly because the upgrades for the deck are kind of marginal. They kind of fill the gap. The deck definitely is getting stronger, but they are not as huge as the upgrade that Sabine Green had, for example. So I think it's a deck that still has some weaknesses. And the aggro matchup has become a lot closer than it used to be because of Poe and Wrecker really being very strong against Boba Fett. So with all that being said, it is obviously still a very strong deck. In my opinion, it's going to be. In my opinion, it's the second best deck in the game. I feel Sabine Green is the best. This comes into second. So we'll see how it performs in the meta. And I'll be excited to see how it's going to come around. But this to me, from my testing, has been my best version. I give you all my reasoning behind the card choices, so hopefully that helps out. As usual, guys, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you're looking to improve your game plan, check out my coaching schedules in the comments below. And guys, see you next time.